NFL season is about to begin, so it's time for more dumb videos from yours truly. In this video, I take a look at what if the best offense in NFL history also happened to go 0-17. Using Pro Football Reference, I went week by week and looked at the highest scoring losses from each week since 1970 to create the greatest offense possible to go 0-17 with. Some of these games you might remember, most of which you probably won't. Let's begin. Week 1, 2018 New Orleans Saints versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In this explosive season debut, the Saints put up 40 points, but were no match for the powers of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who ended up throwing for 417 yards and 4 touchdowns, as the Bucs racked up 523 yards and 6 touchdowns in total. Drew Brees and the Saints offense weren't too shabby themselves, racking up 475 yards of offense and 5 touchdowns, as Brees completed 37 of 45 passes for 446 yards and 3 touchdowns with no picks. The Saints had a couple garbage time scores to make the final score look a little more respectable, but this was a complete no-show on defense by a team that was one terrible call away from going to the Super Bowl, while the Bucs would end up going 5-11. Week 2, 2007 Cincinnati Bengals versus the Cleveland Browns. The Bengals put up 45 points, 531 yards, 33 first downs, and 6 touchdowns all through the air from the right arm of Carson Palmer, and it still wasn't enough to bring home the W, as their defense gave up 554 yards and 51 points to a Browns team that actually did go 10-6 and also helped make Derek Anderson a Pro Bowler. The game was pretty close most of the time, with absolutely no defense being played on either side. The Bengals had a shot at the very end of the game, but Carson Palmer threw an interception in desperation, and that was all she wrote. This game is also notable for Chad Ochocinco, aka Chad Johnson, getting beer thrown on him as he jumped into the stands after a touchdown. Week 3, 1986 Miami Dolphins versus New York Jets. This is one of the more famous shootouts in NFL history between 1983 draft classmates Dan Marino and Ken O'Brien. While it's safe to say the Dolphins got the better pick with Marino, on this day it was O'Brien who emerged victorious despite Marino throwing for 448 yards and 6 touchdown passes. O'Brien wasn't too shabby himself, throwing for 479 yards and 4 touchdowns, including one as regulation expired to send the game into overtime, where he threw another touchdown, all to Wesley Walker, to win the game 51-45. The Jets put up 581 yards of total offense, 32 first downs, and 7 touchdowns. God, I can't believe Dan Marino never won a ring. Week 4, 2022 Detroit Lions versus Seattle Seahawks. Everybody knows the 2022 Lions were an offensive juggernaut when they were playing at home, but even that wasn't a guarantee that they would always win, as they were no match for future Hall of Fame quarterback Geno Smith. The Lions themselves put up 45 points and 520 yards of offense, as well as 6 touchdowns, but the Seahawks racked up 48 points and 555 yards of offense, as well as 6 touchdowns. Even though the final score was just a 3-point difference, a touchdown pass by Goff closed the gap to make it seem slightly more competitive than it really was. But overall, it was an entertaining game. It even featured some defense too, including a pick 6 by Seattle. Would have been nice if Jared could have scored this many points in Super Bowl 53. Week 5, 2013 Dallas Cowboys versus Denver Broncos. This is a game that you probably remember. Tony Romo famously threw for over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, while the Cowboys had 6 scores and put up 48 points, but it wasn't enough against the Sheriff during his 55 touchdown season in 2013, as Peyton threw for 414 yards, 4 scores, and even ran for a touchdown, and helped the Broncos come back from a 7-point deficit in the 4th quarter to tie the game. In typical Romo fashion, he had great numbers, but in the highest leverage moment, he threw a terrible interception, which allowed Denver to run the clock down to the final play to kick a chip shot field goal to win 51-48. I wonder where this Broncos offense was in Super Bowl 48. Week 6, 2018 Kansas City Chiefs versus New England Patriots. Oh, that bastard Tom Brady. During Mahomes' breakout MVP 2018 season, the very first loss of his career came in Week 6 at Foxborough. Mahomes got off to a slow start, failing to register any touchdowns in the first half as the Patriots got out to a big lead. As it happened, the Chiefs would eventually have a lead in the 4th quarter for a short amount of time before the Patriots retook the lead and added a field goal to make it 40-33, but the Chiefs' quick strike offense showed up as Mahomes found Tyreek Hill for a long score to tie the game at 40 with several minutes left, but as we all know, Tom Brady is inevitable and ended up leading a field goal drive against a terrible Chiefs defense, and the game ended with Steven Gostkowski kicking the game-winning field goal as time expired for the Patriots to win 43-40. Week 7, 1983 Washington versus the Packers. In this famous Monday Night Football shootout, Washington, who would end up setting the single-season record for points that year, lost 48-47, despite putting up 552 yards of offense, 33 first downs, and 5 touchdowns, and only turning the ball well over once. But their nemesis, Green Bay, was able to put up 473 yards of total offense and 6 scores with a return touchdown as well. Despite all the lack of defense being played, Washington had a golden opportunity at the very end as reigning league MVP kicker Mark Mosley, yes, you heard that correctly, missed a chip shot field goal that would have given Washington the win, but instead sent them home as losers. Week 8, 2015, New York Giants versus New Orleans Saints. This famous game came the day after Halloween on 2015 and saw a ridiculous 14 touchdowns scored. The only difference in the end was a field goal by the Saints, which gave them a 52-49 win. The Giants racked up 416 yards and 7 touchdowns, while the Saints and Drew Brees threw for over 500 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, one of which was returned for a touchdown by the Giants that gave them the lead temporarily. All in all, the Saints racked up over 600 yards and 35 first downs to waste one of the best days of Eli Manning's career. The Giants had a chance to win at the very end with the ball tied at 49, but they couldn't do anything with it. In a surprise to no one, neither of these defenses made the playoffs in 2015. Week 9, 2006 Cincinnati Bengals versus San Diego Chargers. The Chargers would end up going 14-2 in 2006 behind LT's record-breaking season, but on this day they started out behind as the Bengals took a 21-0 lead and a 28-7 lead at certain points before the Chargers rallied. Carson Palmer once again found himself on the wrong end of one of these games, putting up 41 points and 445 yards of offense with 29 first downs and 5 touchdowns and just 1 turnover, but it was not enough, throwing for 440 yards. His defense gave up 7 touchdowns and one last-ditch effort as time was running out fell short for Palmer and the Bengals. Not even Marlon McCree could fuck up this Chargers win. Week 10, 1972 Los Angeles Rams versus Minnesota Vikings. Going way back in time for this one. The Rams churned out 426 yards, 41 points, 25 first downs, and 5 touchdowns in all, and it still was not enough, as Vikings Hall of Fame quarterback Fran Tarkington destroyed them, throwing for 319 yards and 4 touchdowns, while a 30-yard defensive fumble return by Paul Krause, the all-time interceptions leader by the way, would end up being the difference. Tarkington threw 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns to hold off the Rams' rally, although at the end of the year, neither team made the playoffs. So what was the point of this game? What's the point of anything in life? Why are my balls itching so much? Week 11, 2018 Kansas City Chiefs versus Los Angeles Rams. That's right, the 2018 Chiefs make 2 appearances on this list. This famous Monday Night Football game saw the Chiefs put up 51 points, 556 yards, 27 first downs, and 7 touchdowns, although they did have 5 turnovers, including a couple that ended up with touchdowns for Los Angeles. The Rams, on the other hand, put up 54 points, 455 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 7 touchdowns of their own. Mahomes threw 6 touchdown passes, the last of which gave the Chiefs a lead in the 4th quarter, but of course his defense couldn't do shit and gave the lead right back on a beautiful throw from Goff to Gerald Everett. Mahomes would have a couple chances late to either tie or take the lead, but he threw 2 interceptions on the last 2 drives as the Rams won 54-51. Again, would have been nice if Jared Goff could have done this in Super Bowl 53 instead of putting up 3 fucking points against Tom Brady. Week 12, 2015 Jacksonville Jaguars versus Tennessee Titans. You didn't expect a Blake Bortles sighting in this video. Well, guess what? You're wrong, and you're welcome. Statistically, it was one of the best games of Bortles' career as he threw for 5 touchdowns, and the Jaguars scored 6 touchdowns overall. But unfortunately, there is the other side to the ball as well. Bortles threw 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns, including one that gave the Jaguars the lead with 10 minutes left. But then Marcus Mariota ripped off an 87-yard touchdown run, and the Titans scored on a defensive fumble return within a span of 44 seconds to take a 10-point lead. Bortles would throw another touchdown pass to reach the final score of 42-39, and would get one more drive to win the game, but failed, going 4 and out. That's right, folks. Blake Bortles once threw 35 touchdowns in a single season. Week 13, 1983 Kansas City Chiefs versus Seattle Seahawks. We take it back to the early 80s for this one, a shootout that ended with the Seahawks winning 51-48 in overtime. The Chiefs scored 7 touchdowns and put up 431 yards of total offense, but it was not enough against the Seahawks, led by Dave Craig and Steve Largent, who ended up putting up 531 yards of offense, 33 first downs, and 6 touchdowns. Chiefs quarterback Bill Kenny threw a go-ahead touchdown pass late in the 4th quarter, put KC up 48-45, but the Seahawks kicked a game-tying field goal as time expired in regulation, and then another field goal in overtime to win the game. The Chiefs would end up missing the playoffs entirely, while the Seahawks would finish 9-7, but go on to make a surprise run to the conference championship game before losing to the LA Raiders. Week 14, 1985 Pittsburgh Steelers versus San Diego Chargers. It was was a long cry from the days of the Steel Curtain as the Chargers rung up 54 points on the Steelers, but the Steelers gave a notable effort, at least offensively, putting up 44 points of their own. At one point, the Steelers were down 34-17, but they rallied back to tie the game at 34 and at 41, and even took a 3-point lead in the fourth quarter before the Chargers scored a touchdown to go up 47-44, with a chance at the very end to steal the win with a game-winning drive or a game-tying field goal. Steelers quarterback David Woodley threw a 47-yard pick six to lose the game 54-44. Neither team made the playoffs, and this was the last great season of Hall of Fame quarterbacks Dan Fouts' career. Week 15, 2018 New York Jets versus Green Bay Packers. During his time in Gotham City, Sam Darnold did not have many great performances, but this was one of them, as he threw for 341 yards and 3 scores with no interceptions, as the Jets scored 5 touchdowns total, including a kickoff return touchdown. The Jets entered the fourth quarter with a 15-point lead before future Hall of Fame quarterback and ayahuasca enthusiast Aaron Rodgers went to work, but not with his arm, with his legs. In the fourth quarter, Rodgers ran for 2 scores, including a 2-point conversion, to give the Packers a 3-point lead with a minute left. The Jets would tie the game at 38 to send it in overtime, but the Packers won the toss, and Rodgers drove the team down and eventually found Davante Adams for the game-winning score to win 44-38. Week 16, 2011 Detroit Lions versus Green Bay Packers. The famous Matt Flynn game, where he threw for 6 touchdowns and 480 yards, while the Packers themselves racked up 550 yards to eke out a 45-41 win over the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford, for his part, threw for 520 yards and 5 touchdown passes, and the Lions in general had 575 total yards, 32 first downs, and 5 touchdowns. Stafford's last touchdown pass came with about 2.5 minutes left to give the Lions a 3-point lead, but the defense couldn't hold. Down 4 with the ball with about a minute left, Stafford got the team to the Green Bay 37 before he threw an interception in desperation to seal the loss. Both teams would go on to make the playoffs, the Packers with a 15-1 record, Lions a 10-6, and it turns out neither of them would win a playoff game that year. Week 17, 2021 Los Angeles Chargers versus Las Vegas Raiders. I know all of you remember this game, a game in which Justin Herbert threw 64 passes for 383 yards and 3 scores. The Chargers scored 4 touchdowns, including 2 in the final 4.5 minutes to make up for a 15-point deficit. The game would go into overtime, where the teams would exchange field goals to tie the game at 32, before the Raiders hit the game-winning field goal as time expired in overtime to prevent what would have been an extremely confusing playoff scenario that I don't really remember at the moment, but I know a lot of gamblers were upset. Either way, this is one of the most memorable games, even if it's not the most high-scoring game, for Herbert's last couple touchdown passes. But in typical Chargers fashion, it came in a loss. Now that the 0-17 season of failure has been completed, let's look at some numbers. The 0-17 offense produced record-setting passing stats, throwing for 6,600 yards, 69 touchdowns, 17 interceptions, with a 118 passer rating. The ground game wasn't shabby either, rushing for nearly 1,800 yards and 21 touchdowns. Overall, the team put up 734 points, an average of 43.2 points per game, 8,090 yards, an average of 476 yards per game, 453 first downs, an average of 27 per game, 94 touchdowns, an average of 5.5 per game, and 37 turnovers. How on God's earth could a team with an offense that potent and that historically amazing not win a single game? Well, let's look at the defense. The defense gave up 6,338 passing yards, 60 touchdowns, had just 12 interceptions, and opposing quarterbacks had a stellar 123.2 passer rating. The run defense wasn't much better. Teams ran for nearly 2,400 yards and 34 rushing touchdowns. Overall, opponents scored 811 points, or 47.7 points per game on average. Opponents also put up 8,460 yards, which is nearly 500 yards per game. Opponents also averaged about 27.5 first downs per game and scored an incredible 102 touchdowns, an average of 6 touchdowns per game, while having just 25 turnovers. Let's compare the 0-17 team's offense to the current NFL record holder. 734 points destroys the current record holder, Denver Broncos of 2013, 606 points. The NFL single-season record for yards offensively is from the 2011 New Orleans Saints. They put up 7,474. The 0-17 team offense cleared that. Here's a complicated one. The 2012 New England Patriots actually have the most first downs of any team of all time, and they did it in 1 fewer game than the 0-17 team offense, but hey, shit happens. And finally, the 0-17 team offense, 94 touchdowns blows away the 2013 Denver Broncos' current NFL record of 76 touchdowns. That's the good. Now let's look at the bad. New single-season defensive records the team set, the bad kind. The 0-17 team gave up 811 points, shattering the 1981 Baltimore Colts mark of 533 points allowed. The 0-17 team allowed 8,460 yards, again shattering the 2012 New Orleans Saints record of 7,042 yards. The 0-17 team's defense had 467 first downs allowed, again shattering the 2018 Kansas City Chiefs record of 419 first downs allowed. The Chiefs still went 12-4 that season, by the way, somehow. And finally, the 0-17 team's defense had 102 touchdowns allowed, completely obliterating the 1981 Colts and 2020 Lions' current record of 68 touchdowns allowed. In conclusion, the best way to go 0-17 with the greatest offense in NFL history is to also have the worst defense in NFL history. Who would have thunk it?